from this way out, this way forward. Sometimes not literally in chains, but under house arrest or some type of control from this point forward all the way to Rome. And we're going to see that, kind of like what we saw in Genesis with Joseph, how God was with him even in prison. And we're going to see some parallels with that. Chris will also...
And not surprising, if there's parallels with Joseph, then there's parallels with Jesus. So lots
right.
of the trials, and even to the point where both of them will get slapped inappropriately in the trial. I mean, down to little details like that.
Yeah.
Paul is walking in Jesus' footsteps.
Yes.
We missed the last few weeks. Who arrested Paul?
Well, in the last episode, I think it was the Sanhedrin that called him, and that's where we're still
so
at the defense.
in 22, that's right, you were in 22, he came and he wanted to give his testimony at the temple, and then he was doing fine until he mentioned we're gonna go to Gentiles, and then that's when a riot started. And then more of a protective custody, the Romans descended and yanked him out before anything bad happened. And then he said, I want to go talk to him again. And then another riot happened. So
yeah.
So then they basically locked him up because he was...
Well, it's more for his own protection, but yeah. And then here, we're... So the Roman guy said, well, the mob isn't working out. I'm going to arrange a meeting with the council to find out, what's this guy charged with? What's he done?
You have to keep in mind that Paul's a Roman citizen.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I did not know that.
So he has protections.
Yeah.
Like certain rights and privileges and
It's
whatnot.
kind of like an American, if we followed our Constitution, that we have certain protections.
Rights and protections.
Right. So
In theory.
he has Roman, and at this point, the Romans actually followed their rules. So they're actually giving him protection, and there's some honor and some other stuff that we'll see that Rome, and like Chris said in his background video, Luke always seems to portray the Romans in a good light. You will see that he does that kind of throughout. That's not to mean that the Romans are always good. It's just that he's highlighting the good out of the Romans. You're seeing, Romans accepting Christ. You're seeing Roman here standing up for Paul. You see a lot of that throughout this section. So with that being said, we're going to have a lot of things we can apply today to our lives. We're going to see him continue his second defense, and this is going to be in front of the Sanhedrin, kind of like what we talked about, the committee. Like you just said, the commander is going to give the committee a chance, because the commander is a little confused. He's a Roman citizen, and he hasn't broken any Roman laws. So he's like, what do you want me to do with this? And then they said, well, he's broken our laws. So now the commander's going down to the Sanhedrin with him to hear their laws, to see if any of those laws correspond or conflict with his Roman laws that he's supposed to uphold. Because if you broke a Roman law, then the Romans will rightly have that. So we're going to find out if he's guilty or innocent. And we're going to hear his defense. So with that being said, we'll just jump in here. Someone want to read the first two verses?
I'll read it. Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in a good conscience before God until this day, and the high heinous commander who stood by him to strike him on the mouth.
So here you have Paul. Notice he calls them brethren, right? So that's a respect, and as Chris would point out, he calls himself a Pharisee, a Jew, so he's identifying with his audience, even though he's not abolished the Torah, he's just accepted the new covenant.
Okay.
And
He probably knew a lot of people on the council too.
exactly. So he's saying that, but as soon as he says in good conscience, the high priest commands him, slap him on the mouth. You know, you can just see it in the room, right? So the high priest, who's supposed to be presiding over this council, and it's supposed to be held in honor and dignity and give the person a chance to talk, he's so offended that he, quote, blaspheming God and saying he's acting in good conscience, you know, that he commands somebody to slap him.
But the rules of that day, if you weren't, you couldn't mistreat a prisoner. I mean, that's one of the violations that they did with Jesus. So they're doing the same thing here.
So I put in here on your handout there at the top of page 2 a quote from the Biblical Illustrator, and you know, if we kind of try to parallel this situation with us today, I think there's some takeaways here. You know, first we have this good man, and he's in with pretentious hypocrites, furious associates, an average heathen captain, a stupid soldier, and only one of these lived in good conscience, right? And it's easy to see who's following Jesus in the crowd, right? And yet the good man is among all of his enemies, right? And then, but the good man among the enemies has God's care and God's love. Are we any different, right? So, you know, the thing that...
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't assume the entire council was against him, but I think he probably had some friends, and maybe some, like Nicodemus was on the same council back in Jesus' day, so there may have been some followers.
Yeah, and I would agree, but I think all those people were there too.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, it's never black and white; it's always gray, right? But I think so many times we just feel shocked or surprised when things don't go our way. You know, I mean, like I have a young lady that I work with. It's probably about Hannah's age, and she's a relatively new examiner, and we were at this bank exam, and management just wasn't getting it, right? And we had to deliver bad news on their ratings, and the chairman, who's very dominant, I'll just leave it at that, very dominant, he decided to go to Africa in the middle of the exam, so he wasn't there. And then he comes back to see that all the ratings are downgraded on his bank, and she has the pleasure of giving him the ratings at the management exit meeting. And he goes off on her and essentially calls her incompetent and, you know, degrades her, you know, and even our management doesn't really have her back, and they're kind of like, well, you know, these are tentative ratings and we'll review them.
They hung her out to dry.
You know, hung her out to dry, you know, and then she calls me crying, you know, and I have to pray with her and console her, and, you know, but that's, you know, she's trying to do the right thing. She's trying to, we have a job to do, and we're paid to call balls and strikes. We don't go, well, you really, even though you deserve this, you should, you know, we'll give you a break and only rate you that. You know, that's not our job, right? Our job is to rate according to the guidelines. So she was, you know, but it kind of reminds me of this council, because he comes in and just says, slap her. Yeah, I mean, that's essentially metaphorically what happened, right? And
he knows about your visit months in advance, and he booked a trip.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, and they have a statutory right, obligation to be there when the examiners are there. And he went to Africa, and now he's complaining, right? But that's the world we live in, right?
Reacting and not responding.
Exactly. So our world is no different, right? And unfortunately, we even though we say we don't, we expect hardship, we don't. A lot of times we're like that too. We're reacting, Okay. Anything else there, Chris? Okay, let's go on to verse 3.
Should have done on that, when the guy was doing that, he should have said, yeah, and your customer service rating just went
yeah.
in the pot. Sorry.
Yeah, and they even accused me too, because I had downgraded about 3 of their loans personally. So, and I do like a audit walkthrough on the banks to check to make sure they're like locking the vault, and they've got, basic procedures, right? And a lot of the banks haven't had people do that in a long time. And a matter of fact, this bank hadn't had it done before. So, on top of all of this, they claimed that, and your examiner, Cody, scared all of our tellers and terrified them and said that he was going to close the bank and just totally lied, on what I did.
Yeah.
And I always find problems, and I found no problems. I actually gave them a compliment on their thing, and yet this is the one bank in 3 years that complains about the walkthrough, right? So it had nothing to do with the walkthrough. It had everything to do with the millions of dollars of loans that I classified, right? But they couldn't argue on those merits, so they hit you over here,
Yeah. Take the focus off of my wrongdoing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're
Exactly.
the reason why this happened.
Yeah, so I had my manager call me, I had to give an account, get called on the carpet, the whole 9 yards.
Deflecting responsibility.
Yeah, that's all it was. But
what's the lawyer's adage? If you have the truth, if you have the facts, pound the facts. If you have the truth, pound the truth. If you don't have the truth or the facts, pound the table.
well, they did a lot of that. Verse 3. Go
Then
ahead.
Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law?
Okay, so this is kind of a controversial statement. We're going to see that, here's my opinion, and I kind of agree with McGee here, is that, silence in the face of evil is consenting to evil. So Paul courageously is, he's one man against the council right now, and he's falsely accused, and then he gets mistreated, slap him, so he calls him out on it. Now we're going to find out he didn't know that was the high priest that he was calling out, but nonetheless he stood his ground. So, when I look at this from an application standpoint, I can't help but look at our country, right? Like, how far have we fallen? In 1776, people were willing to die for this country. Now it's like, that doesn't bother me. It doesn't impact me. I'll just stay silent, right? And we've been like a boiling frog until we're here, right? If we all had more courage, like Paul, to stand up and call the violations at the time they're met, and we did it, we wouldn't be in the shape we're in. Go ahead.
So you said that silence is consent, but Jesus was silent during his trial. So what?
For the most part, until he was struck. But he didn't react like this. He just said, why, if I've said something wrong, point it out. If I haven't said anything wrong, why did you strike me? So I think the difference is Jesus was calm. Paul kind of snapped a little bit. But yeah, for most of his trial, he was silent until he was put under oath, where he had to legally.
But he wasn't
Yeah.
silent in front of the Pharisees. He called them whitewashed tombs, and here
Yeah.
we have whitewashed walls.
Right.
But the difference here is Jesus knew what his mission was.
Yeah.
And his mission was to die on the cross. So we've got to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And in that case, he needed to be silent in front of his shearers, right? To have God's will be done.
Yeah, to complete all
Yeah.
that needed to be done, all that needed to be done
Right.
for wiping away of all of my sin and the world's sin from the beginning of time.
And I think it's important as well to remember that when to stand up and say something and when to let God do his thing.
Yes.
Like I just learned, you guys might have heard of it, I posted it on Facebook. I went to urgent care in Bonham, and the provider, my kids were fine, but I was there with all 4 of them. The provider looked at them and said, I don't know how you put up with your kids, they're completely out of control. And
Wow.
in that moment, and then the office manager came in and kicked me out of the practice and threatened to call the police on me because I defended myself. I basically said, how dare you say that? And in that moment, I realized, and I hope it's a lesson that I remember, I was told by a few people, don't do anything about it. You know, you don't want her retaliating against you and calling CPS or whatever. And I was like, I can't rest without knowing I at least tried to do
Right.
something about the injustice. And so I filed a complaint against her medical license. And then I contacted the higher ups at the Quick Visit Urgent Care to inform them of what was going on. And once I did that, I felt like I had stood up to injustice, and the rest is in God's hands. You know, if the office manager lies, there's
Right.
nothing I can do about it, but I did what I needed to do. And it's important to remember when to stop and let God versus when to stand up and do something.
Yeah. No, I filed a complaint too on a judge in town. So I understand, but at some point you have to just drop it,
Yeah.
right? So I understand. But meekness is not weakness, right? It's misconstrued many times. And although Jesus was silent, he did say, I am, you know. So he honored God and he spoke up knowing the price that he would pay. Okay, 4 and 5.
I got it. And those who stood by said, do you revile God's high priest? Then Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people.
Okay, so a couple of things. We don't know why he did not recognize the high priest. So, like we talked about before, it could have been the vision. He needed some snappy glasses like you have there. Or it could be that the high priest was not dressed in his usual garb. So, we know that they had quite the garb back then. So, that could have been the case. The application point here, which is one that's hard for me, which is personally convicting, is that Paul here, of course, quotes that we should not speak evil of the rulers, right? Which is convicting for me, because I have very little respect for current leaders and some of the current leadership, most of the current leadership. But understand that Paul said this, which is convicting to me, at the time when their king was Nero, right? So as bad as ours is, he isn't Nero.
Was Nero terrible? Like
Yeah.
the worst of the worst?
Nero would put Christians on a pike and use them as lamps in his backyard.
Oh, good Lord.
So that's how bad of a ruler he was. So he would literally put tiki torch oil in them and light up his backyard with Christians. He was sadistic to say the least.
So you've been to the Colosseum in Rome, right?
Mhm.
2,000 years ago, Nero was putting Christians in the Colosseum to be like butchered basically by gladiators for
Mhm.
And
entertainment.
lions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The gorier, the better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And that's what it is with perversion. You get a kick at a short level, and you have to go higher or worse, and worse to get the same kick. And
Yeah.
it's like a drug addiction.
So, I guess, I think, Chris, you quoted this before, is do you pray more for your leaders or do you complain more for your leaders?
I pray more.
Well, I'd like to say I do. I'm working on that. I'm getting better. And sometimes I pray for justice. But go ahead.
You pray for him and go campaign against him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we have the right and the time to do that. Yeah.
Yes.
And Paul is such a good example. I mean, he disagreed
Yeah.
with leaders in his time, but did it well, and
Right.
respectfully and lawfully, and you know, the gospel was shared by the multitude because of his demeanor, and of course, the spirit upon him. But such a good example.
But we have that same spirit upon
Yes.
us. So we can do likewise.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what you're doing, we all need to be doing because we don't know how much time we have, right? Look at Canada. Canada's about ready to pass a law that anything that they define as hate speech is imprisonment, right?
And they've already
And
had
it sounds
pastors.
good because who wants hate speech? Well, no one wants hate speech. Well, what are you defining as hate speech?
Anything
Te-
they don't like.
teaching the Bible is anything they don't like. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I saw something else. In Ireland, they're just opening the doors for immigrants, and yet was it Ireland or Sweden? One of the countries. They're all kind of the same. They're like, and the Muslims are saying, well, the Christians are having 1 kid or 0 kids. We're having 8 kids. It's just a matter of time before
Yes.
we're running this country.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah.
1992, in Philadelphia, Muslims were paying single mothers $400 a child. They're per month, and their only stipulation is that when they're of age 5, that they go to the mosque. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the birth rate in the Western countries, of us, and
Yeah.
like Americans and
Yeah.
England
Yeah.
and all the Western countries, the birth rate is below 2, which means it's below the replacement rate.
Yes.
And all the other countries, of course, it is high. So it's mathematical what's
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
happen unless we change.
They're brainwashing young women into thinking that having children is bad. I saw
Yeah.
it in college. I mean,
Yeah.
the constant chat about overpopulation and carrying capacity for humans and everything, they're literally brainwashing
Yes.
young women into believing that they should
Yeah.
not have kids.
Right.
And they're also destroying the idea of a family unit.
And that brainwashing is just ubiquitous, especially the depopulation thing. Like I went to the Sphere in Vegas, and which is an incredible place. The cinematography, the views, all that was great. But the show we saw was Postcards from Earth, and the message was, you, the people, have ruined Mother Earth. And then they started with the whole amoeba thing, and they totally denied creation. And then the theme of the movie, it starts with these two that are getting out of their spaceship, and then they land on a new planet, and then they say, now it's time to repopulate, and maybe in 1,000 years we can go back to Earth if she's had time for Mother Earth to heal from what we've done to her. That was the message of the movie. And the sad thing is like the cinematography was excellent, and you could actually probably even take all the images of the movie and just overlay a different thing on it, and you could, I mean, like for instance, they had like ancient ruins, and then they had this huge tree that was growing through them. So you could have said, that that God used the tree and the planet's healing, but they didn't even speak of the tree. They just talked about how the ruins, So it's just
Not recognizing their own culpability and the sin and iniquity that they have perpetuated for thousands and thousands of years because they've rejected God as their creator and they want to make their own rules.
Yeah. And the irony, of course, is they're giving you this message while you're sitting in a $1 billion building that they built in Vegas of all places.
Yeah.
It was hilarious. Anyway, okay. 6 through 9. Let's go.
But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged." When he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. Then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees' party arose and protested, saying, "We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God."
Wow.
So the commentaries I read think that there's Paul gave his testimony between verses 5 and 6 because they clearly know about the vision, and he told them all about that. So Luke just chose not to go there. But so again, he probably got some favor when the high priest ordered him slapped. He probably lost that immediately when he called out a curse, and then now he knows it's not going to end, probably favorably unless he does something. So Paul's probably a great chess player, and he says, "Let me make this move," and gets them all fighting against each other. And it's just interesting that he says, "I am a Pharisee," because a lot of the commentaries would say, "Well, he's just made that up." Well, he's under oath here. I mean, if he lied about this, he's committing perjury, which and among the Pharisees in the group, that would have been easily disproven if he had turned against them. So I don't see that. But the whole gets into the differences between Sadducees and Pharisees. And if you watch the video, I told that little joke. But if you didn't, the one way to tell them apart is the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection, and that's why they're sad, you see. So if you always want to remember that they don't believe in angels, resurrection, they deny really anything after the first 5 books. So they kind of, the prophets, the visions, they sort of cast that out, and they're just all about temporal power.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, I put Matthew 10:16 here, where we're called to be, as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. And you see here that, God gave Paul, his wits to think on his feet and to use that, and he did carefully here, He knew to expose the division among them and get them fighting each other instead of him, which is what our government does to us all the time, right? They create divisions among us instead of us looking,
Always trick in the book.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know. Do you know do they have to have like 2/3 or, I mean, because I don't think the Pharisees were in the majority, but whoever the Pharisees were saying that he's innocent. So somehow they knew they weren't going to get a conviction from this body, and so again, he should have been set free, right? At this point,
I think it was 2/3.
2/3, yeah. So they didn't. They weren't going to get that, and so without the Pharisees' vote, they needed the Pharisees to cast in, but which they didn't get.
Let's do 10 and 11. Who'd like to read?
Now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks. But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome."
Okay, so a couple things here. First, Luke you know, if you've been following through our Acts journey, he normally says,
Kind of understated.
no small disturbance.
Yeah.
You know, he always kind of, you know, lightly, and then he says great dissension. So
Yeah.
that's code for this got ugly quick.
Mhm.
Like it got really ugly. They were probably, you know, swinging punches. I mean, it got bad. And
Yeah,
it
there
got,
are accounts of physical altercations between the two groups. So
yeah, it got bad quick, and the Roman commander has to step in and rescue Paul again, right? So that's what happens here. So you're going to see this, and then the Lord comes to him. So I thought this was, you know, cool that the Lord comes to him and visits him. So, you know, before when we had talked before, a lot of the commentators were like, why did Paul insist on going to Jerusalem? Because that started him on this path. And Paul said he had to go to Jerusalem, and there were some things of, did he really have to go?
Yeah.
Was that his decision? Was that the Holy Spirit? You know, that type of thing. Well, here you see the Lord confirming that he is doing God's will. He's right in the middle of God's will. And he says, be of good cheer. You know, I mean, this is kind of giving you a high five, like you've done good.
Yeah.
You know, well, he just left having to get plucked out of a fight, of a court battle that he didn't even win, and God gives him a high five, right? So, I mean, you know,
I mean, it's almost like the confirmation he got in Corinth, right? When he said, nothing's going to happen to you here. I have many people.
Yeah.
So
exactly. So, you know, I think so many times we look at things from our eyes, right? And we don't look at it from God's perspective. And what we feel is like a loss, or, you know, a hard time, or like at the clinic, or, you know, like my examiner friend, you know, having to go through all that. God's like smiling because you did your part. You held your good conscience, right? You honored God through it, right? Even though the outcome right now isn't what you had hoped. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think just comparing our day with the Roman days, the Romans really didn't like chaos.
no,
And it's a strategy today.
Yes, it is.
it is.
I mean, Nero might have been bad. You know, we've got some people we don't appreciate that are in power now in various places. But they didn't light anybody on fire for their backyard.
No, they have more subtle ways of doing
Yeah.
it now. But
Like human trafficking.
Yeah.
yeah, they try to just do those deeds in the dark.
And also, he's about to hear of this plot, and so what what Jesus tells him is, don't worry about the plot. You know, you'll be all right. So.
Exactly.
It reminded me of so Moses had died, Joshua's ready to take the nation in, and God appears to him and says, do not fear, be strong and courageous, be of good cheer. In Joshua 1:9. So it's kind of that similar affirmation of it's going to get tough, but
It's gonna be okay.
I'm right there with you. Yeah.
12 through 15.
And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. They came to the chief priests and elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him, but we are ready to kill him before he comes near.
So, anybody see any irony here in this oath?
Well, obviously they started it.
Well, they found a corrupt priest to annul their vows.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. They're sinning. They're breaking one of the 10 Commandments, right? They're plotting murder, and they're asking God to bless their efforts.
Lying about it.
Lying about it. Yeah.
Bribery.
Yeah.
You know,
And
that's in
Your yes should be your yes, and your no
Yeah.
should be your no,
Yeah.
and you
We're
know,
honoring God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're asking God to bless whatever it is they're doing. I mean, it's like,
well, their zeal is not the zeal of the Lord.
yeah.
But what we're going to see here is the application point for us is a lot of times we seem to be, and I'm just speaking to myself, a lot of times I seem to be focused on the physical because we live in the physical, but it's really the spiritual realm where a lot of this is happening, and we're going to see that God moves in the spiritual realm, and again, he's protected in the spiritual realm, and God's playing all the keys on the piano, and we're going to see how God works this out. And which reminded me of Ephesians, and I put in there, if someone wants to read it from the handout there, Ephesians 6:10 and 12 from the Message. I thought it was an interesting translation. So someone want to read that?
And that about wraps it up. God is strong and he wants you strong. So take everything the master has set before you, well-made weapons of the best materials, and put them to use so that you will be able to stand up to everything the devil throws at you. This is no weekend. Where are we? Where'd it go?
5.
I'm trying to find 5. There you go.
Yeah.
Weekend war that you'll walk away from and forget about in a couple hours. This is for keeps, a life or death fight to the finish against the devil and all his angels.
I thought that was an interesting take on it.
Yes,
It's kind of a fresh take from the way we normally read that. So, you know, I think a lot of times we get lulled into the physical realm and looking for physical solutions. And, you know, we've all had experiences. You know, what made me think of it was Chris's story when he was in Israel and the bus broke down.
Or Greece,
Turkey,
actually. Yeah.
Greece,
Yeah.
right? And the bus broke down, and you know, Chris prayed, and then the leader came on the bus after it got running, and he says, "Okay, who prayed?" And then Chris raised his hand, you know. And sometimes we just don't, you know, we want to look and see, okay, where is it? Is it the oil? You know, all that.
Yeah.
You know, what happened? You know, are we low on water? You know,
Yeah.
instead of praying about it, and it may be that it's
Yeah.
not that you shouldn't check the oil and the water, but maybe
Pray-
you should
pray
pray first. Then go check the oil and the water. You know, so let's go 16 through 19.
So when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, "Paul, the prisoner, called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you." Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked privately, "What is it you have to tell me?"
So a couple of things here is you see the providence of God. I mean, we find out a little bit more about Paul. His sister is living in Jerusalem.
He has a sister.
Yeah, he has a sister.
Mhm.
You know, he has his family, which kind of relates with what
Yeah.
he's saying, that he is a Pharisee. You know, he can call them brethren. He actually, you know, has family there, and he, you know, we find out about that, and then we find how God uses even this. You know, he uses the ineptitude of them to hold a secret with 40 people.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What a lot of people don't realize is no matter where the priests were or these guys coming to them, there were servants everywhere. There were slaves everywhere. And it was true then, and it's true going forward. Everybody believes that a slave or servant has little or no value. That what is said, you know, that they won't share.
Right.
Anyway.
Now, the thing that struck me on this was, you know, even though God is protecting Paul here, Paul still has some responsibility. So you notice that Paul had to react. And I think sometimes that's the step we miss, right? So many times we don't have that accountability in our lives and we don't blow the trumpet. So can someone read the Numbers verses there, 10:9-10?
When you go into battle in your own land against an enemy who is oppressing you, sound a blast on the trumpets. Then you will be remembered by the Lord your God and rescued from your enemies. Also, at your times of rejoicing, your appointed festivals and new moon feasts, you are to sound the trumpets over your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, and they will be a memorial for you before your God. I am the Lord your God.
So are we good at sounding the trumpet, right? And the metaphor I look at here is you sound the trumpet, you know, in the good times and in the bad. You know, are you praising God? Are you doing it? I think that's kind of the takeaway from this verse. And, you know, God will protect us, but he also gave us authorities. He gave us a mind to use. He gave us his wits. He gave us all these things. And, you know, we can't just sit back and wait to get raptured out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've got to do our part, right? And anything else there, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 20-22.
And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you. So the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, tell no one that you have revealed these things to me.
So we see that God uses even this commander, right? And the commander apparently cares enough to make sure that the
Right.
kid doesn't tell anyone, you know, for his own protection, likely, right? And then I'm guessing those 40 got very hungry.
Yes.
23-24, let's see the response.
And he called the two centurions, saying, prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen, and go to
Caesarea.
Caesarea at the third hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on and bring him safely to Felix and the governor.
Okay,
So
so
he's
go ahead.
getting out of town and he doesn't even have to walk.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's getting a nice treatment here.
Yeah, so you can
Sort of,
see
yeah.
kind of like what we talked about before, how God plays all the keys on the piano, you know, the white ones and the black ones. And here, you know, the commentaries I read kind of talked about this commander likely was sucking up to his boss, right? His boss is the governor, right? So this is his chance to suck up to the boss. We'll see a little bit of that in the letter that we're going to read here in a minute. So he now is going to take cred, right? Street cred, as my kids would say, is look at me. I protected a Roman citizen, and I'm going to the nines, right? He's, you know, and meanwhile, God uses his pride and him wanting to give essentially Paul an honor guard, you know, detachment with 400 soldiers, and get him safely to the governor, right? Where he'll get to do his next testimony. So see, God can do all this and use even people that are unlikely, right? He has a history of doing that. Look at Nebuchadnezzar, right? The guy was a total egomaniac but humbled and became the most powerful king recorded in the Bible and did God's will in the end. So, you know, I think that's fascinating. Go ahead.
No, I was thinking the pilot might have had a different reaction. Just, well, okay, well, we'll schedule a meeting and whatever happens. You know, he'll be. And then, of course, in modern days, you know, the Paul would be sent to his ambush, and they'd go have the kid eliminated because he's, you know, the only person who knows anything about the plot can't be allowed to be around. So
Yeah, exactly.
God had his hands on this.
He would he'd be like that Boeing and whistleblower.
Yeah.
right?
Oops. Having himself an accident.
Ooh, must be suicide. It's crazy.
Yeah.
He just committed suicide like that. Yeah. But the point here for us to take away is if you're in God's will, you're good,
Yeah.
right? If we could just stay in God's will, if I could just somehow or another keep me from going my will and stay in God's will, then I'm going to be good, right? Regardless. 25 through 29.
Got it. He wrote a letter in the following manner. Claudia Lysias, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. And when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving the death or chains.
So we'll just stop here. You notice that he rescued Paul,
Yes.
right? You know, we kind of skipped over a few details of how they
Mhm.
roughed him up and then later found out he was a Roman citizen.
Right.
Skipped over that part, you know.
Maybe slapped him.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of sucking up in that
Yeah.
letter
Oh
there.
yeah. Yeah. You can
Typical bureaucrat.
you can see that.
Play the game.
Yeah.
And Paul played it too. He didn't tell him.
Yeah.
Yeah. He
So
did.
yeah, he would have had. It would
Because
not have
he
been in
was-
his interest to tell.
Yeah. Why is this a serpent, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'll keep my mouth shut, you keep yours, and
Yeah.
we'll go on down the road, right? And then notice that Luke goes out of his way again to say that Paul was innocent, right?
Mhm.
Nothing that he's violated of our laws, right? So you know, want to go on, or you got anything else?
No.
Okay. 30 through 35. We'll finish it out.
And when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. Then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to, who's that?
Antipatris.
Antipatris. The next day they left the horsemen to go on with him and returned to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea and had delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. And when he understood that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear you when your accusers also have come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium.
So legal technicalities going all through here. I think Luke is just documenting that, and that raises some speculation as to why Luke wrote Luke and Acts. Some think that they were Paul's trial documents for like a legal brief for Rome, and so that's why he's got everything to the detail here. Basically, what was I going to say? Oh, so they left at 9 o'clock at night, so he had no chance for this plot to unfold because they were going to do it the next morning. And so the soldiers had to, forced march
In the middle of the
at
night.
the middle of the night, which they were used to doing, maybe 4 to 5 miles an hour. So they were moving quickly for if you're marching. So he gets them out of there. Antipatris is about halfway between Caesarea and Jerusalem. It's in a Gentile area, so the threat's gone. So then some of the soldiers can head back, and then the rest can go on to Jerusalem.
Yeah, and then he asks where he's from for jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Back to the legal thing. So Felix, the governor, wants to make sure that he can actually rule on
Yeah.
it first. So kind of a legal matter there.
It's amazing how despot Felix was, but God
Yeah,
still used it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's what I had here in the notes.
Yeah, I
But
read it.
yeah, you read that. So he had Felix had actually arranged for the assassination of the prior high priest. So he was far from a just governor,
Mm-hmm.
but yet God's in control, right? So God's gonna ensure no matter what judge you're in front of, no matter what thing, that God's will be done if you're his kid, right? So thank God we're his kids.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, somebody want to pray us out?
Lord, we thank you for this class, Lord. We ask you, Lord, to just be with us as we go through this